You, in my office. Now. Miss Callahan's voice cut through the noisy hallway like a blade. The students froze, heads turning. It wasn't every day that a teacher yelled, especially not at the new kid who hadn't said a word since transferring in 2 weeks ago. The boy, Malik Carter, looked up slowly, his deep brown eyes, calm and unreadable, locked with hers. "What did I do?" he asked. Voice quiet, but clear. "Don't play innocent," she snapped. "I saw you push Kevin in the locker room. I didn't touch him," Malik replied evenly. "That's detention," Miss Callahan barked, turning on her heels. "You'll learn respect if it's the last thing I teach you." The whispers exploded the moment she walked away. Damn, that was harsh. Malik didn't do anything. She's always picking on him. Malik stayed silent, picking up his bag, as if this wasn't the 5th time this week something like this happened. In the detention room, he sat in the corner, sketching quietly in his notebook. The room was mostly empty, except for the echo of ticking clocks and the scratch of pencils. Mr. Greaves, the custodian who sometimes covered for detention, looked up and sighed. "Again?" he asked. Malik didn't answer. He just kept sketching. Meanwhile, Miss Callahan stormed into the teacher's lounge, slamming her planner on the table. "That kid," she hissed. "He's trouble." Mr. Jennings looked up from his coffee. "Malik Carter?" "Yes. And he lies straight to my face. His attitude, he thinks he's smarter than everyone else. Or maybe he's just smarter than you," a soft voice said. They turned to see Miss Vasquez at the corner table. She looked up from her laptop. "You've had it out for that kid since day one. What exactly has he done?" "He's defiant. He doesn't engage. He acts like rules don't apply to him." Miss Vasquez shook her head. "Or maybe he's tired of people assuming the worst." Miss Callahan scoffed. "Well, maybe if his mother taught him some manners instead of letting him walk around like he owns the place." "She did," said a voice behind her. They all turned. Standing in the doorway, dressed in a tailored navy suit, was Principal Harper. Next to her stood a woman, tall, poised, skin the color of sun-warmed bronze, a quiet fire behind her eyes. "I'm his mother," the woman said coolly. "Dr. Maya Carter, neuroscientist, founder of Carter Global. Maybe you've heard of me." Miss Callahan went pale. "Let's rewind 48 hours. It started with Kevin, Miss Callahan's favorite student, claiming Malik shoved him into the lockers during gym. There were no witnesses, no video, just Kevin's word. Why would he lie? Miss Callahan argued. Miss Vasquez raised an eyebrow. Why would Malik? But Miss Callahan had already decided. Later that day, in detention, Malik sat alone while Mr. Greaves left to grab paperwork. The door creaked open. "You okay?" It was. Ava, quiet but bookish, always at the front of class. "I saw what happened." Kevin slipped. "No one pushed him." "Why didn't you say anything?" Malik asked. "I wanted to, but Miss Callahan looked so sure. And Kevin, he's the golden boy." Malik nodded. "Doesn't matter, she's made up her mind." Ava hesitated. "That's not right. I'm going to say something. You don't have to. But I will." That night, Ava told her mom what happened. Her mom called the school. By morning, the story reached Principal Harper. Principal Harper didn't waste time. She called Dr. Carter. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I think you should come in. It's about Malik." Dr. Maya Carter's voice was calm. "What did he do?" "Nothing." "That's the problem." When Dr. Carter walked into the school the next morning, she wasn't just a parent, she was a force. At the meeting, Miss Callahan launched into her usual spiel. "He's disrespectful. He doesn't participate. And now he's putting other students at risk." Dr. Carter raised her hand. "Enough. Did you see him push this student?" "Well, no." But Kevin said, "So you took the word of one student over another, without evidence. And this isn't the first time, is it?" Miss Callahan looked cornered. "He has an attitude." Dr. Carter leaned forward. "You know what I see when I look at Malik. I see a boy who's moved across the country because his mother's job relocated. I see a kid with a 4.0 GPA who reads neuroscience textbooks for fun. I see a young black boy judged not for what he's done, but for what you assume he might do." The silence was suffocating. Principal Harper cleared her throat. "Miss Callahan, I think it's best you take a step back from this situation. Malik's record will be cleared, and we'll be reviewing how we handle disciplinary actions, especially those without evidence. Miss Callahan flushed. Fine. As she stood to leave, Dr. Carter added, and one more thing. Yes, next time, before you rush to judgment, ask yourself what you're really reacting to the child's actions or your own bias. When the door closed, Dr. Carter turned to Principal Harper. Thank you for calling me. I'm sorry I had to. So am I. But Malik's used to fighting battles he didn't ask for. He's got a spine of steel. Got it from his mama. Outside, Malik waited, slouched in a chair, sketchbook in hand. Doctor. Carter smiled and knelt beside him. Ready to go. He looked up. Did you yell at her? I didn't have to. The truth did all the yelling. Malik chuckled. You always say that. Because it's true. Back at school, things shifted. Students whispered about Malik, about the teacher who got it wrong, about the woman who walked in like a storm and left calm as the ocean. Ava caught up with Malik at lunch. You okay? Yeah. Thanks for speaking up. I was scared, but I'm glad I did. Me too. In the next weeks, Malik started participating more in class. Miss Vasquez encouraged him. Other teachers checked their assumptions. Miss Callahan, still teaching but quieter now, avoided eye contact in the hall. And Malik, he just kept sketching buildings, designs, future blueprints. He had dreams, and now, finally, space to chase them. What nobody knew was that years later, Malik would grow up to become one of the world's youngest black architects to design for NASA. But long before that, in a dusty detention room, he learned something just as important. Your truth is your armor, and sometimes silence speaks louder than shouting, especially when your mother walks in, and the world finally listens. That night, Malik sat by the window of their high-rise apartment. City lights blinking like quiet stars. His sketchbook rested on his lap, half filled with lines forming a complex structure, his dream school, with open green spaces and solar panels embedded into the rooftops. Dr. Carter stepped into the room, 2 mugs in her hand. She handed him one. Chamomile tea. You okay, baby? She asked gently. Malik nodded, though his eyes stayed on the paper. Why do people look at me like that? She sat beside him. Like what? Like I'm dangerous. Or like I don't belong. Her gaze turned to steel because they're afraid of what they don't understand. Because you are powerful in ways they can't comprehend. And sometimes they try to shrink you before you realize how big you can be. He looked up at her. So what do? You rise, she said. Every damn time. The next morning, Miss Callahan was noticeably quiet during class. Her voice lacked its usual authority, her instructions curt. When Malik walked in, her eyes flickered, but not with their usual fire. It was something else. Hesitation, doubt perhaps, or shame. Malik didn't react. He simply took his seat at the back, opened his sketchbook, and waited. Midway through the lesson, she stammered, Malik, I want to apologize for the way I handled things. The room went silent. No one moved. He looked up. Okay. I was wrong to assume, she added, still quiet. Malik tilted his head. You mean wrong to assume because I'm black? Gasps, a few shocked murmurs. Miss Callahan froze. She didn't answer right away. Yes, she whispered. Malik nodded slowly, closed his book, and said, Thank you for saying it. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. Later, Ava caught up to him at the lockers. That was brave. I just said the truth. Still brave, she smiled. You want to come to the art club after school? I think you'd like it. Malik considered it, then nodded. Yeah, maybe I will. That week, the art club became his escape, surrounded by canvases and quiet energy. Malik let his guard down. He painted, sculpted, sketched, and for the first time since moving, he laughed genuine, full laughter that echoed off the walls and made others look up. smiling without knowing why. Meanwhile, Principal Harper reviewed school policies. Miss Callahan was placed under mentorship, and at the next school assembly, she was asked to present on cultural sensitivity and unconscious bias. She stood before the auditorium, words trembling on her tongue. I judge someone not for what they did, but for who they were. I thought I was fair. But fairness isn't passive. It's active. It's choosing every day to see beyond stereotypes. Malik, I owe you a public apology, and I want to thank you for your strength. The students applauded, some out of respect, others out of relief that someone finally said it out loud. Malik stood near the back. He didn't clap. He didn't scowl either. He just watched, arms folded, his expression unreadable. Afterward, Ava found him outside. You could have made her look worse, but you didn't. She made herself look worse, Malik said. I don't need to pile on. The days grew easier after that. Malik excelled in class, started leading group projects, helped design the yearbook cover. His quiet intelligence became the subject of admiration rather than suspicion. Teachers began asking for his input. Students listened when he spoke, but not everyone was a convert. Kevin still held a grudge. One afternoon, he cornered Malik near the science lab. You think you're some kind of hero now, huh? Malik didn't flinch. I think I'm tired of guys like you hiding behind teachers. Kevin's face twisted. You calling me a liar? I'm calling you a coward. Before Kevin could throw a punch, Mr. Jennings appeared. Everything all right, boys? Kevin backed off, muttering something under his breath. Malik didn't report it. He didn't need to. The balance had shifted. A few weeks later, the school hosted Career Day. Dozens of professionals lined the halls, doctors, firefighters, and then there was Dr. Maya Carter. She stood tall in front of her booth, flanked by a holographic brain simulation and advanced biotech displays. Her voice commanded attention as she explained neural mapping, AI in medical diagnosis, and how Carter Global was using data to change the world. Students clustered around her, jaws dropping. You're Malik's mom, one girl asked. Dr. Carter smiled. Yes, I am. No way. You're like famous. She's been on TED Talks. Another whispered. Miss Callahan passed by, eyes widening as she saw Dr. Carter laughing with students, holding court like a queen in her kingdom. Later, as the event wound down, Dr. Carter found Malik leaning against a wall, arms crossed, watching her. Impressed, she teased. He smiled. A little. Good. Because someday you'll stand here, and the world will listen. Malik didn't doubt it. A month passed, then two. Graduation crept closer. Malik's application to the National Institute for Young Architects was accepted with a full scholarship. He was the only student in the state to make the list. At the award ceremony, Principal Harper read the announcement with pride. And finally, the Carter Global Youth Innovation Award, presented to the student who demonstrated resilience, vision, and leadership, goes to Malik Carter. The auditorium erupted. Miss Callahan stood and clapped slowly, genuinely. Malik walked to the stage, accepted the medal, and stood behind the podium. I didn't think I'd be here today, he began. Not because I didn't think I was smart enough, but because I thought people like me didn't get seen unless we messed up. I was wrong. You saw me. You heard me. And now I'm going to build a world where kids don't have to fight just to exist. The applause lasted long after he stepped down. That night, as Dr. Carter tucked the medal into his suitcase, she paused. I'm proud of you, Malik. I know, he said, smiling. I'm proud of me too. The next morning, he boarded the train for Washington Point, D.C., sketchbook in hand. The city loomed in the distance, and his future with it. Behind him, a school remembered the boy they once misjudged, and ahead of him, the world waited for what he would build. Washington, D.C. was different, bigger, faster, louder. The streets buzzed with energy, every honk, every shout, every moment vibrating with purpose. Malik stepped off the train with a single duffel bag and a laptop case slung over his shoulder. He was 18 now, taller, sharper, but still quiet, still observing. still carrying every lesson the world had taught him about who he was and who he refused to become. He had been accepted into the National Institute for Young Architects, a prestigious program that selected only the top 12 minds in the nation under the age of 20. His schedule was intense urban planning in the mornings, AI design modules in the afternoon, and studio critique at night. Most students burned out in the first semester. Malik, he thrived, but DC had its shadows too. He was the only black student in the program, and while most of the instructors were supportive, there were whispers, side eyes, doubts cloaked as questions. How'd you get in? Full scholarship. Must be nice. I didn't know they were doing outreach programs. Now, Malik didn't respond. He just built. His first major project was a sustainable micro-home designed for post-disaster relief zones. His model was flawless. Solar panels, folding walls, even a rooftop garden system that could be deployed in under 30 minutes. Professor Lennox stood back during critique and stared at the prototype. Who helped you with this? No one, Malik replied. You expect me to believe that? You can believe whatever you want, he said, voice calm. But I built this, every inch. The room went quiet. Over the months, Malik's designs began getting noticed by NGOs, urban think tanks, even the mayor's office. He was invited to speak on panels, to collaborate with visiting architects, to mentor younger students. He had gone from invisible to undeniable, but no matter how far he rose, he never forgot. One night, as he walked back to his dorm, he got a call from his mother. How's my genius, son? She asked. Tired, he laughed. Happy, but tired. That's a good kind of tired. I saw your interview in the Architect Digest. You look like your dad. I miss him, Malik whispered. I know. He'd be proud, just like me. There was a pause. You know, she added. Miss Callahan reached out. Malik froze. Why? She's moving. Asked if she could write you a letter. For what? To say thank you. He didn't answer right away. A few days later, the letter arrived. Malik, I won't pretend that I deserve your forgiveness. What I did to you was wrong. I saw defiance where there was only quiet strength. I saw threat where there was brilliance. I've spent the last few years working with equity programs, listening more than talking, trying to be better, not just for students like you, but for all the ones I never saw clearly. Watching your success has been humbling and inspiring. If you're willing, I'd like to visit DC someday, to see one of your buildings, to see who you've become with my own eyes. Miss Callahan, he read it twice, then folded it and slipped it into the back of his sketchbook. A month later, he was chosen as lead designer for a new youth tech hub in the city's southeast quadrant, an area long neglected by developers. The city was skeptical at first. He's young, one council member whispered, too young. But Malik presented his plan with such clarity, such vision, that even the doubters leaned forward. We don't need another glass box, he said. We need breathing spaces. We need centers that reflect the community, not erase it. We build for the people who live here, not for the ones who want to move in. The motion passed unanimously. Construction began in fall. Malik visited the site every day. Hard hat, boots, blueprints tucked under one arm. He knew every inch of that building, the curvature of its walls, the insulation materials, even the mural space reserved for local artists. On opening day, the mayor gave a speech. Cameras flashed. Reporters jostled. But Malik barely heard them, because standing near the back, clutching a small bouquet of wildflowers, was Miss Callahan. Their eyes met. He walked over slowly. She looked older, tired, humbled, but her eyes were full of something real. Miss Callahan, he said. Malik, she smiled, hesitant. It's beautiful. Thank you. I read everything you've published. Your essays, your work, it's extraordinary. He didn't answer. I came, she added softly, because I needed to see it. Not just the building, but you, who you became despite me. I didn't become this despite you, Malik said, voice quiet but strong. I became this because of you. She blinked. You were the first person to tell me I didn't belong, he continued. That pushed me to prove it wasn't true. Every design I built, I imagined the kids like me who'd walk through it. I imagined a world where they never had to sit in detention just for being themselves. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I'm so sorry, Malik. He shook his head gently. Don't apologize again. Just keep showing up. Keep choosing better. She nodded, silent. They stood there a moment longer. Then she placed the flowers at the base of the welcome sign and walked away. That night, Malik sat in the center of the tech hub's atrium, staring at the mural, a swirling pattern of color and steel, lit by skylight. Kids were already running through the halls, exploring. Laughter echoed against the walls he had dreamed up in silence years ago. Ava called. I saw the grand opening on live stream, she beamed. You did it. I guess I did. Malik smiled. Come visit sometime. I've got an entire rooftop garden to show off. Only if there's snacks. He laughed. Deal. The years passed, like brushstrokes. Malik's name became a staple in every architectural journal. He designed housing for hurricane victims, schools for underserved districts, even helped build a refugee camp that was later nominated for a humanitarian award. His work wasn't just beautiful, it healed. He hired interns who reminded him of his younger self. He spoke at schools where kids never saw themselves in blueprints. And every year, on the anniversary of his first detention, he'd sit quietly in a cafe and sketch a new dream, a tradition, a reminder. On his 35th birthday, he stood before a crowd at the Carter Global Innovation Summit, now run jointly by him and his mother. Dr. Carter introduced him with tears in her eyes. People always ask what it's like to raise a prodigy, she said, but Malik wasn't born to impress. He was born to lead, to love, to rise. When he took the stage, he paused a moment, letting the silence hold. I was once sent to detention for doing nothing, he began. But today, I build spaces for kids who dream of doing everything. Thunderous applause. After the speech, a young boy approached. Big eyes, trembling hands. Mr. Carter, I want to be like you. Malik knelt down. Don't be like me. Be better. Build higher. Dream louder. And as the boy ran back to his mother, Malik looked up at the lights, at the stars hidden beyond them, and whispered, Thank you, Mom. Back in his apartment that night, Malik opened his old sketchbook, page after page of dreams once doubted. And in the back, still folded, still crisp, was Miss Callahan's letter. He read it one last time, then closed the book, turned off the light, and slept soundly. Because he had finally built the thing they said he couldn't. A life not just lived, but respected. It had been 22 years since Malik Carter was first sent to detention for something he didn't do. 22 years since a teacher judged him by his silence instead of listening to what he had to say. But that moment, which could have broken a lesser spirit, had forged a man of fire and grace. Now, at age 40, Malik Carter stood inside the Carter Youth Pavilion, a sprawling glass and greenwood structure in Baltimore's heart, named after his mother. Its walls were not cold, rigid forms, but gentle curves wrapped around lush courtyards and sunlit atriums. It wasn't just a building. It was a sanctuary, a legacy, and it was opening day. Reporters lined the garden pathways. Drones buzzed overhead, capturing the light that shimmered across the rooftop panels. Inside, the main auditorium hummed with anticipation. Dr. Maya Carter, now with strands of silver in her braided hair, stood proudly beside her son. She wore a deep blue silk dress and a pin shaped like a brain with roots and branches, Malik's first logo. Now a global symbol of youth innovation. You nervous? She asked. He exhaled. Not nervous, just aware of everything this moment means. I know. Your father would have been in the front row, grinning with tears. Malik smiled, eyes glassy. You're here. That's more than enough. As he took the stage, applause swelled. He stood behind the podium, not with notes or a teleprompter, but with memories, living, breathing memories. When I was 16, he began, I was punished for being quiet, for standing still, for existing in a skin that spoke louder than my voice. That moment changed me, and for a long time, I was angry. He paused. The crowd leaned in. But then I took the pain and shaped it into purpose. I built bridges from judgment to understanding, walls that protected, not divided, roofs that shielded dreams instead of stifling them. He turned toward the young students in the front row, middle schoolers, some in wheelchairs, some immigrants, some survivors of unimaginable odds. This building isn't mine, he said. It's yours. And every sketch, every panel, every beam in this place was made to hold your future. Because you deserve more than survival. You deserve space to rise. A standing ovation. After the ceremony, Malik wandered through the courtyard garden, hand grazing lavender plants. A young teacher approached a woman in her 30s with an eager but nervous smile. "Mr. Carter," she said, "my name is Eliza Callahan. My mother was your teacher." Malik turned, surprised. "She passed away last year," Eliza continued. "She told me everything. How she failed you. How you forgave her with grace she didn't deserve. She spent her last years working in underserved schools. Because of you." Malik's chest tightened. "She changed. She did. Because you gave her a second chance." And she never stopped talking about how one student reshaped her entire life. He nodded slowly, eyes misting. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "That means more than you know." As she walked away, Malik turned to the sky. Above him, doves passed overhead in soft formation, cutting through the clouds. Back inside, he found a quiet corner, opened a fresh notebook, and began sketching. Not a building, not a monument, but a story. A boy, a detention slip, and a mother who walked through fire to make the world see her son. Because some legacies aren't built from steel or stone. They're built from the courage to forgive, the strength to endure, and the audacity to dream anyway.